Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our second webinar. My name is Tarek. I'm the CEO of McAlvin's. I'm joined by Salish, who's one of our founding partners and a director, specialized in tax and business planning, as well as extensive experience supporting businesses with international trade. Also, I'm joined by Muntazir, who was also with me on the last webinar. He's been our oracle for COVID, everything related to COVID actually, for the past 3 months, and has some 10 years experience in general practice and property. Also, we've got a special guest, Caesar Khan, who's from 360 Law, equally extensive experience working with international law firms, and he's going to be talking about legal related issues on the furlough schemes. Obviously, the topic is everything related to furloughing, and as you know, the scheme's been very, very successful to now. Some million employers have applied under the scheme. 8.4 million employees are currently furloughed, and some 2 million self-employed individuals have claimed under the self-employed income support scheme. So we'll be taking you through the changes of those announced by Rishi Sunak last week, and also giving you an update on how that impacts employment law-related issues, which Caesar will be addressing. Throughout the presentation, please raise questions in the Q&A panel chat that you have there. We'll try to address them as we go through the presentation, but those that we can't address, we'll pick up at the end. We'll have plenty of time at the end to go through them. We have had some questions also by email, and so we'll try to address those also. So I will pass over now to Muntazir, who will take us through the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme changes.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Tariq, for the introduction. So I'll be specifically focusing on the changes that have been mentioned by Rishi Sunak over the last couple of weeks. As we all know, that this scheme has been very popular and has been the most interesting one that has been introduced by the government. This scheme so far has been used by 1 million employers, and the total amount of values that has been claimed in this scheme has exceeded 15 billion in value. So it's a significant amount. The specific changes that are being introduced is that the scheme will operate for has been in operation since March, obviously, and the few changes are that employees will now be able to work part-time from 1st of July. Rather than previously set at 1st August, the government has now accelerated this to bring it to July, which is a positive step, and because most of the businesses are now opening or starting to open or considering options in opening. So the government have realized this and brought forward and accelerated the part-time option. There is also the introduction of flexible furlough. So going forward, I'll be using that term because that applies from July onwards up to October. So that will now be called flexible furlough, which means that employees can be brought in part-time working basis at any shift working patterns and any amount of time. So you can bring back your employees on a part-time basis from 1st of July. The other change which is expected is as has been muted and has been mentioned that the government at some stage will ask employers to make some sort of contribution towards the scheme. So from 1st of July, employers are expected to make some sort of contribution. So I'll get into more details on that. So what happens now? So the scheme is closing to all the new entrants from 10th of June. What does that exactly mean? So as previously mentioned, that any employee being furloughed have to be at a minimum period of 3 weeks. So 10th June, 3 weeks, that takes us to 30th June. So if you are considering to furlough any employees and use the flexible furlough scheme in July, you should ensure that those employees are furloughed by the cutoff date of 10th June. Because after that, you will not be able to meet the minimum 3 weeks criteria for you to then be able to furlough employees in the flexible furlough scheme come 1st of July. As mentioned as well, employers can now start to bring back the employees on a part-time basis from 1st of July. And the next one is on CJRS grant, which will begin to taper from 1st of August. So what do we mean by that? So from 1st of August, the government is tapering down or reducing the amount of contribution. So let's keep it fairly simple, and I can go through an example. So at present, from 1st of March up to June or July, the government is contributing 80% of the furlough grant, as well as the employer NIC and pension. In July, in the flexible furlough scheme, there is no changes for the government contribution as well as for the employers. In August, the government will still contribute 80% of the furlough grant. However, the employer will have to pay for the employer NIC and pension. Come September, government is reducing the 80% contribution to 70%. That means the employer will have to top up the 10% and also pay the employer NIC and pension. And in October, which is the last month where we will be able to claim any furlough grant, the government will only contribute 60%, and the employer is expected to then contribute the remaining 20%, as well as the employer NIC and pension. So as far as the employee is concerned, they do not lose out, as they will be paid the 80% of the grant. So what does it mean currently if your employees are in furlough? So at present, as an employee, you do not need to do anything, because you will be receiving the grant up until end of July. But in August, you will then have to put some sort of contribution towards the NIC and pension. Why is bringing the employees back to work on the flexible furlough scheme? There are a couple of considerations that need to be made. One is obviously you would have had a written agreement with them that they are being furloughed for a certain period of time. However, from 1st of July, because they are then allowed to work on a part-time basis, you will need to kind of extend that furlough or flexible furlough agreement and get some sort of consent from that they are happy to continue to be furloughed on an arrangement. Maybe it's a part-time basis or working pattern basis. The second thing is that you will need to ensure that you report any hours that they are working and any hours that they are not working, because the hours that the employees work, that means the employer will have to pay for that, and any non-working hours are the ones where the furlough grant can be claimed. So those are the key updates from the recent announcement by Rishi Sunak. Thank you.
And I think just a clarification, I think on the cut-off date of 10th of June, effectively that needs to be the start of the furlough period. So don't think it's the 11th of June, it's the 10th of June when the furlough period has to commence. So I think that's really, really important for everybody to understand, and also to consider whether, and I think we had a question on this that came through earlier on today, is to consider if you were thinking about furloughing somebody but you're not quite sure about it. Obviously, there's 4 months of potential benefits that follow June, so it may be advantageous to furlough people that you're sort of sitting on the fence about now, just to protect the flexibility that you'll have in July, August, September, and October.
Yes, so that applies to individuals who have not been furloughed previously. You'll need to ensure that if you want to use that flexible furlough scheme, to ensure that they are furloughed by 10th of June. However, if you had already furloughed an individual before the 10th of June, then this does not apply to you then.
Exactly. And I think Salish now is going to take us through the employment-related scheme. Sorry, self-employed-related scheme.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. So the government support for the self-employed sector was announced by the Chancellor in March as the Self-Employment Income Support Scheme. and it was set to run for an initial period of 3 months to the end of May. The scheme in its current form provides a taxable grant equivalent to 80% of a self-employed individual's average trading profit for 3 months, capped at £7,500 in total and paid in a single instalment. The scheme opened for applications on 13th of May and will close on 13th of July 2020. So far, 2.3 million claims have been made, totaling just under £7 billion. The Chancellor has now announced effectively an extension of this, a new round of funding for self-employed individuals. So I think we need to go to the previous slide. Previous slide, yeah. So, as I said, the Chancellor has announced an extension and a final grant for self-employed individuals, this time reducing it from 80% to 70% of the average trading profits for a 3-month period, capped at £6,570 in total, and again paid in a single instalment. Who is eligible for this grant? The next slide, please. The eligibility criteria remains the same for the second round of funding as it did for the first. In essence, there are about 4 or 5 tests that you have to clear. The first one is that you actually traded in the tax year ended 5th April 2019 and had trading profits of no more than £50,000. Also, these trading profits must be more than or equal to your non-trading income. So if I give an example, if your trading profits were £20,000 and you had rental profits and, let's say, dividend income and or interest income of more than £20,000 in addition, you would not be eligible. The trading profits have to be the majority of your income. The second eligibility factor is that you continued your trade into 1920, i.e. the tax year ending 5th April 2020. You intend to trade for the year ended 5th April 2021. Your 2019 tax return has been submitted on or before 23rd of April 2020, and I don't think that's an issue for any of our clients. And finally, an important and a potentially overlooked test is that you have to certify that your trade has been adversely affected by coronavirus. Just to clarify, people who pay themselves a salary and dividend through their own personal service companies are not eligible to use the scheme because technically they are not self-employed. Next slide. Can you apply if your work and income have not reduced? The simple answer is no. One of the self-certifications you need to make is that the trade has to be adversely affected by coronavirus. So if you've continued trading and you're still making approximately the same level of profits and have the same level of turnover, then you have not been adversely affected. Do you need to apply for the first round of funding to claim for the second? I think that's the next slide. Again, the simple answer is no. There is no requirement for you to have made the claim for the first round of funding in order to be eligible for the second. Next slide, please. The SEISS actually is extremely flexible, unlike the furlough scheme, insofar as individuals in receipt of an SEISS grant can continue to work begin a new trade or take on other employment. So you can apply for the grant on the basis that your previous self-employment has been adversely affected, and then get a job, conduct a new trade, start a new business, and still earn income. So in that regard, it is extremely flexible compared to the furlough scheme. Next slide, please. How can I claim for this new round of funding? Similar to the first one, individuals have to make an application via an online portal. Again, unlike the furlough scheme, where we could, as your tax agents, apply for the furlough scheme, my understanding is under the SEISS scheme, you have to do this yourself, and we as agents are not able to do this. The online portal hasn't opened yet for the second round of funding, and further information is expected to be announced on 12th of June. Will there be a further round of SEISS funding after this second round? This seems highly unlikely. The Chancellor has described this as the second and final round of funding under the scheme. So unless there's a resurgence of COVID and lockdown measures are reinstated, I do not think there will be a further round of this grant. Thank you.
I think just a point on the company directors, Salish, the annual payroll schemes. This is something that came up quite a bit last week, and I've seen a couple of emails come in today related to it as well. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but if the annual payroll was not submitted on or before the 19th of March, then company directors are unable to apply for furlough benefits.
Yes, that's our understanding, although there have been a couple of exceptions where people have got in contact with the HMRC helpline, and depending on the inspector or handler they speak to, we have come across where there have been 2 instances where somehow the HMRC handler has been able to submit and make an application on behalf of the individual, despite this 19th of March rule being there. We've tried it on other occasions where the handler has said categorically no, but there has been a couple of exceptions. In this regard, because I know that an email has been raised, we would recommend those people who are in this scenario to basically ring and try and make an application directly. And there is an extremely small chance that you may succeed depending on the call handler you get connected with.
That's right. I think it's very clear on the government website what the rules are, which is anything after the 19th of March, you do not qualify. But as you say, somehow people have got lucky, I think is probably the right word to use. And so we wish you good luck if you are attempting to do that. But every attempt that we've made so far has not been successful, where we've been the initiator of that. Okay, some more questions coming through. I've got a question from a gentleman called Ian here, but I will address that towards the end once Caesar's gone through his elements. It may even cover off that question. So over to you, Caesar. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope everyone can hear me clearly. So firstly, to introduce myself, I'm one of the founders of 360 Law Group, and we've come across a number of situations, notwithstanding my learned colleagues here have stated that this essentially will be going on for a few months for now, as we can see, but there is potential. Sorry, Joe, if you could go to the next slide as well, so I could just show my slides as I talk about it. And we need to look at what the future essentially holds. And I just want to touch upon some of the sort of concerns that are coming through now, and why it's so important for certain employers and employees to be aware of the manner in which this is being held. So I just want to highlight some of the key considerations and potentials. Let's see what's coming down, watch this space sort of situation. So if you go to the next slide, and I'll just sort of touch upon these few potential areas that could be topic of significant discussion and sort of some case precedents that may come about. So as we all know that there is currently an end date, but there always is some form of reintroduction of business to try to get back to the position that they require in terms of their normal day-to-day running. So there could be a possible further extension of this date. How that is wound down, the scheme is still not clear. It's still not understood that whether they will even consider one just yet, but you never know because it's all dependent on the environment around us, notwithstanding the economy, but just the virus element as well, and the second wave. So it's always important to bear that in mind and ensure that you're constantly keeping up to date with the relevant guidances, both from the Treasury as well as the government itself, and liaise directly where you can if you're unsure, because there seems to be some conflict as we've seen in the initial stages of this. So that's one thing to bear in mind, generally from the end date aspects. But in light of this, a lot of businesses have suffered quite a bit in terms of workforce costs, impacting business revenue, etc. And some elements have touched upon redundancies that were prior to this situation occurring, and some that have been instigated during or potentially being instigated during this, and some that may happen afterwards. So the key point to remember when it comes to redundancies, both as employers and employees, is to ensure that the normal redundancy obligations of consultation and considering all the pool and everything is followed still to the normal way that it should be done, but avoiding all these potential risks of individuals that may be on maternity leave or disability type of scenarios, coupled with the factor of furloughs and if they have been furloughed or not, or what the scenario is around that. So these things have to be captured as part of the consultation. Now, how that consultation works is depending on your workforce and size of your organization. You could probably do an initial general open consultation across the board to that pool, and then sort of specific ones. But you've got to give the opportunity and allow the opportunities for employees, and the employer itself has to sort of ensure that that open dialogue is there. So this is sort of something important to bear in mind. This sort of will be happening on the side as and when this scheme is still running in some way, notwithstanding the impact it could have thereafter. And as I mentioned, just and touch upon sort of people that may be on sick, statutory sick pay as well as the company sick pay as well. Elements of that still need to be factored in, because individuals which could be falling into certain disability characteristics and potentially other things as well, ensuring reasonable adjustments or maintaining that dialogue by giving reasonable positions as an organization, as well as you as an employee, if you are that, ensuring you communicate that across the employer, because it's not within your domain to just be difficult and not open that dialogue. So I think those are important factors to bear in mind. If there is, I guess, time off that you needed to take off, if you haven't been furloughed and you potentially are going to be furloughed, as my learned colleague said, that they have to do this probably the earlier the better. Notwithstanding that, you've got to factor those things in as well, and to have that again an open discussion, whether those be considered as unpaid leave maybe instead of being furloughed, or other ways you can try to get around it if that is. But most organizations would prefer the support commercially from the government. But all of this is all well and good in terms of, it could be either here or there. We could have open dialogues. We could work around certain situations, but there comes a point at some point there may be a difficult position for certain employees and employers to make a decision in terms of what's harming them, what's a detriment, and what isn't. What is the situation around this compared to maybe their peers, whether that's another organization of a like or an individual and within the company itself. So that opens the door to potential tribunal claims at some point, or a potential contentious issue within the organization, or grievances that might be raised internally. A number of them may be at heap at once of similar issues, as well as a pure tribunal claim, depending on how serious it is. So you've got to bear this in mind as part of your overall considerations as well, that there could be some pushback heavy-handed by individuals because they feel they may be unfairly dealt with in some way. The longer it goes, maybe the more likely it's tend to happen. So I think organizations have to be very, very careful that they do constantly keep that channel open to protect themselves, as well as individuals be aware of their rights as well, to see organizations are not just carte blanche, just putting rules in place and taking action in certain ways as well. So these are things that you just have to watch out for. And I think there'll be a number of, when the scheme ends, my view is that a number of internal issues will be there. Employers maybe will be seeking on how to handle those. Employees naturally will be going out to seek their rights and their positions if they've been detrimented. And then that could potentially lead to some tribunal claims. But I think nothing is concrete until a precedent goes into court in some way, which we will try to avoid in a tribunal. And then when a decision is made in regards to that, nobody knows the exact position and how this applies. But there are systems, this contract law in terms of change of terms and conditions, layoffs, and other sort of elements that might be leveraged, but that's a very complicated area in itself. So I think this is something we just have to watch out in the future, probably within the next year, I'd say, given the extension at the moment, that this is always going to be a sensitive point from my view. So that's just a general sort of update from my element of how long this could potentially happen, the consequences. And we've got an open question and answer session here as well, I believe as well. And feel free to ask me as well. And I'll weigh in where I can as well.
Okay, so I've got a few questions that have come in during the course of the webinar and a couple that came in advance. Feel free, everybody, to send more questions in. We've got a little bit of time left. So first question, though, that came from Jane. So Jane's saying she understood that staff could only be furloughed for periods of 3 weeks or more, which is accurate. If we bring back furlough staff on the 15th of June, does that mean they have only been furloughed for 2 weeks and not 3? Does that mean they cannot claim under the furlough scheme, both in June and also in subsequent periods? I think I know the answer to this one, but yeah. I'm going to give it to Montazir.
So as mentioned previously, this only applies to employees who are going to be furloughed for the first time. So if you are thinking of furloughing any employees in order to use a flexible furlough scheme in July, then you need to do it before the 10th of June. However, if you have already furloughed employees, say in March, April, then it doesn't matter. You can bring them back. But you just need to bear in mind, if you do bring any employees back, then you'll have to pay for their wages before June. As well as in July, any hours that employee work on a part-time basis, then the employer has to meet those costs. The furlough grant is only for the hours that are not being worked by the employees.
And only for from July onwards, so not for June. So the second part of Jane's question is, can I put them on part-time work in June and claim that? And the short answer is you can't. The flexi furlough is just from July onwards, so you wouldn't be able to claim any money for the periods that they've worked.
And probably me just weigh in a little bit. Be careful, because I've seen certain organisations consider potentially reducing the salary as opposed and putting aside the sort of part-time to try to cover off that, and that's something very, very sensitive and should be considered very carefully, because it's a change of putting a person in a detriment from what their salary was before, and if they haven't agreed to that or in any way, is something that shouldn't be done just for the sake of because they were on furlough. So you could bear that in mind, that is an option that should be very carefully considered if you're thinking that is an alternative.
Okay, great. And there was an additional follow-up to that from Jane, which is there any benefit in asking staff to take holiday leave when they are not working? So by not working, I think she's referring to being furloughed. I think the short answer is that they don't have to take holiday leave whilst they're on furlough, but they need to be, if they are on furlough, then they need to be available to work if they were to be called back.
Yes, and also to add on to that is there's just few points that we need to bear in mind. One is that employees will still accrue their holidays whilst being on furlough. And employees can also request to take leave. And as an employer, you obviously need to be reasonable and fair and allow them to take holidays. However, any holiday pay that they are entitled during the furlough, they have to be paid at 100% full rate, rather than, say, if you are paying just the 80%, then you need to ensure that say 2 or 3 days they took holidays, you have to pay them the 100% of it. And also you need to bear in mind that some of the employees might be requesting to cancel their leave because of the current situation, and they had maybe travel plans. And as an employer, again, you need to be reasonable, make sure you are maintaining your employee relationship. And then finally, the statutory leave for the employees can be rolled over for the next 2 years. So if you are requesting employees to take leave, which you can, bearing in mind the relationship element, and if they do refuse to take leave because they can't, then those leave will be carried off for the next 2 years.
Thanks, Muntazir. So I've got another question here from Ian. At the moment, I have one member of staff opted in on the company pension scheme and have been deducting her pension contribution from her wages. Is this correct under CJRS?
So I'm assuming that is the employer contribution, which at present, if the employer is contributing towards the pension cost, then they can actually get that for, as part of the furlough grant. However, from August, the employer will have to pay the pension and the NIC. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Muntazir, on that. And then this the annual payroll thing has come up a couple of times by two individuals that I've got in, Marcos and a gentleman called Kouros. So one of them, Marcos, has a friend who's been successful dealing with the matter himself, where his accountants were unsuccessful. Any tips that we can offer? I think we've sort of offered a few earlier on, that the success seems to be coming from the company director actually calling HMRC and going through the situation with them. That seems to be where there's success. You know, the rules are the rules, and as Salish was saying, it depends on the handler who answers the phone, how they're interpreting them or leniency they're giving to it. But unfortunately, that's the only tip we can really give on it. The other question was, what are we doing to, if you like, lobby HMRC to get annual payrolls that were submitted after the 19th of March included for the benefit of furlough? And we have written to HMRC, as we mentioned on the last webinar. We haven't had a positive response other than it will be looked at. Our gut feeling is that not much will happen, unfortunately, on it. So I think that's the position we've taken on it. As we get, we will write to them again. We will, obviously we're talking to HMRC on behalf of clients, but as I say, it's difficult to know whether anything will change. And given that this is supposed to be the final sort of adjustments under the scheme, I see it as unlikely, and I think my colleagues see the same. So probably not the answer you're looking for, but it's unfortunately the only one we have at the moment. We've had a question also here from Ian, which was, from July, do we need to have a new agreement with employees about the extended furlough and flexible furlough?
And the simple answer to that is yes. And obviously, when you initially entered into the agreement, there might have been a period agreed that you are being furloughed for, say, 3 months or 4 months. However, from July, that agreement might expire now. So you need to then enter into a new consent agreement with the employee. And if you are going to have set working patterns, then you may as well put it down, or just say we will have flexible working arrangements on a weekly basis or something like that.
This one I think is for Salish. What help can a self-employed person get who started after April 19?
Okay, so because you have started after April 19, you are not eligible for the SEI SS grant. So then what are you eligible for? Unfortunately, it is you have to rely on the welfare system. So it's universal credits, potentially employment allowance. There isn't any more, I believe, that you could apply for.
Okay, it's, hopefully that answers your question. It's anonymous, so I can't mention the name on that one. I've got another question here, so let me just, it's just popped up, so give me 1 second to read it. Should you claim employers' pension contributions back if you get employment allowance? Not quite sure.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what sort of employment allowance is there, but if you are paying for the employee's pension as an employer, then you are eligible to claim it back from as part of the grant up until end of July.
And it's up to 5%, isn't it? Was it up to 5%?
Up to 5%.
Yeah. So anything in excess of the 5% you can't claim. Hopefully that covers that question. I had a similar question from somebody else as well. So hopefully that gets those.
Can I just add? If you're referring to the employer allowance, which is it at £4,000 each year, which you can offset against the national insurance on your payroll? I did see some. I'm not a payroll specialist, but I know that you're not able to claim employer allowance if you're claiming furlough as well. There is some rules there, but I think we can clarify that at a later stage.
So Jane, I'm still not quite clear. You've sent another question, NI employment allowance. Are you talking about the employer's national insurance contributions? If you are, then those are all claimable up until the end of, end of July. In fact. And then they reduce after that. So hopefully that covers that. So the employer's national insurance contributions you claim back, and obviously the employees are a deduction from the pay, and they get paid over. Okay. I haven't got any other questions. I think there's one question here which I think we need to address directly with the individual, so I won't cover that one off. Are there any other thoughts from the panelists that they can add, just sort of wrapping up?
I would just add that, and I'm sure Susa will comment on this, is that anything you do with your employees, you must understand that your starting position is with a contract of employment, be it verbal or written. You cannot unilaterally change that. So you cannot force anyone onto a furlough system or a flexible furlough system. You have to do it with consent. And in that regard, the consent we would always recommend is evidenced in writing and signed by both employee and employer. To do anything otherwise, you're always open to the risk later on.
Great. So we'll have this webinar up on our website later, well, probably on Monday, actually. It won't get done today. I don't think it's too big a file. So we'll have it on the website on Monday. So please feel free to have a look. We've also got on our website a COVID business support hub where there are tens of updates that we've provided over the past 3 months on the government schemes, and so that gets updated literally within hours of an announcement being made. So, please look there if you're curious about anything. We've also set up another hub on our website, which is a rebuild and recover information hub. So will be very interesting, I think, for most people on this webinar to have a look at that. Some elements are very industry specific, so please take a look. And again, obviously you can contact either one of us here. Cesar Khan, we can provide you with these details if you'd like to contact him obviously he's from an external law firm. And please contact your client director if there's anything else that we can help with. That's it for us for today. Thank you very much for coming along, and welcome any and all feedback.